We have the honor and pleasure of being in the home of Nancy Lieberman. She is of counsel at Skadden Arps. The fact that you invite us in, I think we could just turn the cameras off right now. Thank you for having us.
You're quite welcome. It's my pleasure.
I don't even know where to begin with your career. I know everyone's going to want to know what happened, but we have to start with your focus on M&A at Skadden, youngest attorney, youngest woman made partner to this day.
Wrong. I am the youngest person, man or woman, to have ever been made a partner.
There you go. I wanted you to correct that for me. To this day.
Yes, and I hate being singled out like, oh, the first woman, because you should always be judged as the first of a whole group, not just based on your sex.
And you were, but man, you were on a fast track from day one. How did you know? I've read that you wanted to be an attorney at the ripe age of 12.
Yes, it's true. Yep.
Mm-hmm. How? Why?
Well, first of all, I think I was bored growing up. I grew up in the New York City area.
Bored?
Bored, yeah. You know, it was before the internet. It was, what was there? Television. There was no, 500 channels on TV. And it was boring. I grew up in a really wonderful environment in a neighborhood where in the summers we all played, tag in the neighborhood. We hung out at the neighborhood swimming pool. I went to camp, all of that. But basically, I think I was bored. How many books could you read in a summer? So I did my schoolwork, and I discovered when I was 12, visiting an aunt and uncle who had a son, a first cousin of mine, much older than me, was in law school. And they were regaling us with stories about all the exciting things he was doing as an attorney. And I said, hey, that's good for me, because previously I thought I wanted to be a history teacher because I liked history and politics. But then when I heard about what lawyers did, I thought that was the job for me.
And somehow that made you skip 8th grade?
I skipped 8th grade. Well, I actually grew up in New York City. And in those days, there was a program where if you did well on a standardized test, they offered you the option of skipping. And since my birthday is December 30th, which is the last possible day, the second to the last day in the year, I sort of I was always the youngest. I made a year that way. I skipped 8th grade, and I basically did college in 3 years instead of 4.
Holy cow.
So I sort of had skipped 3 years of school.
On purpose, because you were on a mission to get to law school, or it just bored you?
I was really bored being a kid, and I really wanted to be an adult. I don't know, it's just, and you know what? Being an adult has been a blast. I haven't had a boring moment since I...
Clearly. So you grew up in this family that clearly encouraged you to skip and to keep going and to do.
Right. My father always had this wonderful expression. Every time I achieved something, won an award in school for academics, things like that, it was always, that's a badge of honor. That's a feather in your cap. And keep accumulating those things, and it will assist you as you try to move forward in your career. So I was always induced by my dad. The first time my father sent me flowers was when I was elected to this honor society in college in my junior year called Phi Beta Kappa, which is supposed to be for the top, 1 or 2% of the class. And he sent me 24 roses. He never sent me flowers before, but Phi Beta Kappa, 24 red roses.
So you made him proud.
Yeah, he was very happy. He really encouraged me a lot.
So you found law. You ended up at Skadden. And how did you end up in so 1987, at the age of 30, youngest partner ever in Skadden history still?
Yeah. Because how many people skip 3 years of school?
Because in theory, you're
most
just
people nowadays take a few years off before they go to law school.
Right, because you got out of law school at 22. Most college kids are you're just getting out of college at 22.
Right, and I had all those questions about will you be old enough to take the bar exam, which I was at 22. But then I decided, I took a step back, and I said to myself, okay, you could do this, but I'd already worked at Skadden when I was 21 as a summer associate, and they actually offered me the job when I was 20 at the beginning of my second year of law school. So when I went there to work for the summer, I recognized that this really is the big leagues, and I'm really only at that time 21, and I just realized that there were certain things that might come easier to me, and might fit in better if I had a few years under my belt.
Socially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I did was very fortunate. I clerked for a United States Federal Court of Appeals judge in the Fifth Circuit, which was the entire South. They split it subsequently from the year I was there, but from Georgia through Texas, the entire South. And I traveled around with my judge to New Orleans, to Dallas, to Atlanta, to hear different cases. I did that for a year. It's a tremendous honor to be selected. And then I went to NYU to get a tax law degree because I like taxes. And I thought, I mean, I hate paying them, but I liked studying about them.
I do too, actually.
And,
I mean, I like studying them.
Right. It was really interesting the way they taught it at my law school. So I went to NYU and did that for a year. And by then I was 24 and I was close enough and I was ready to.
But that even took maturity at that young age to realize you didn't have the maturity.
I didn't have the experience. I mean, remember that old
you did
TV
have the
show
maturity.
from when we were kids, Doogie Howser?
Yes, of course.
Right? I wouldn't let Doogie Howser touch me with a 10-foot pole at 17 or whatever it was, because you could have a lot of book smarts, you could do well on tests, you can think clearly and all of that, but I noticed in law school, the people who did the best were the women who were at that point in the 1970s, already in their 30s, had children, had families, and law school wasn't the only thing in their life, and they were able to put it in perspective, and they brought their life experiences and their wisdom. I'm a great believer in wisdom.
Interesting.
Everyone doesn't know everything by the time they're 20
For sure.
or 25 or even 30. You know a lot, and you have a lot of knowledge, but there's a lot to be said for having real life under your belt. It really helps you.
I am way older than that, and I know every day that I still don't know everything. I know nothing some days.
Well,
I feel dumber now as I get older.
Well, because you know why? You realize how much you didn't know.
Right.
And maybe that's an advantage to some people, when they say ignorance is bliss, but that's not the way I've ever functioned. I like to know everything so I could feel comfortable making a decision. And now, of course, I'm at the point where, after so many years of practicing being a partner at Skadden for so many years, it's kind of like you feel like you know more in your left pinky than some people.
Right.
Because there are just things that are part of your intellect, part of your experience that you can draw on that help you make wise, recommendations for your clients.
So can you talk about M&A then? So you fell
Sure.
into M&A. Private equity, corporate governance.
Yeah,
that was
right,
all from the
exactly.
beginning, right?
Uh-huh, yep.
And worked on some major deals.
Correct.
Do any stick out as some of your favorites?
Well, the first deal that I worked on, because another reason why I had this wonderful acceleration to partnership was the firm gave me credit for all the things I did before as a lawyer, clerking and graduate school, and they put me on a fast track to partnership in 5.5 years, and where I'd never practiced law in a corporate setting. And so by the time I was like 5 years out of law school, they said, congratulations, you're now a senior associate. But I hadn't been practicing for 5 years, only maybe 2.5 or 3 years.
Why did they do that then?
Because that's how the system worked.
But that's so progressive of the firm back then to even like...
Yeah, well, the first big deal that I ever did was a Japanese joint venture. This is when a lot of Japanese companies were aggressively buying up American companies.
Yeah, they bought Midtown at one point, right?
Right, they bought Rock Center.
Right.
But there was a large Japanese steel maker that bought half of National Steel based in Pittsburgh. And this was a very high-profile transaction at the time. And when you think about how progressive Skadden Arps has always been, nobody ever said, oh, gee, you're a woman, it's 1984,
Right. They're
Japanese, they're all men, how are they going to relate to a woman? Nobody said that at Skadden. They just said, oh, you've gotten great reviews. Here's a deal, do it, you know.
That's great.
And nobody cared that I was a woman. And interestingly, the clients were I think the great thing about learning about Japanese businesses, they take their situation as they find it, or the when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And I guess they figured, well, this is America and this is the way it's done. And they were, you know, pretty accepting of it. And at the end, they brought me back a beautiful present from Japan for the closing dinner and all that. It was a very difficult deal. So that was I went from being a junior, like, plebe at West Point to being a senior associate in a very large, nearly $1 billion, well, not quite, but hundreds of millions of dollars, this is 1984, in a high-profile deal. And then the next deal after that was being a senior associate in the largest non-oil company merger in history for 1985, which was a $12 billion combination of Allied Chemical, which was our client, with another company called Signal Companies. And it was, you know, a cast of thousands. It had every issue you could know, known to mankind. And they said, here, now you do this deal. And
so you were basically the lead on it.
The lead associate. Now, of course, there were partners above me, but, you know, oh, Nancy, here's a couple of precedents. Friday night, by Sunday, I want the first draft.
Oh, God.
And this partner cleared all the papers off his desk, had a huge desk like you could land an airplane on it, and said, you know, here are 3 or 4 precedents I think are going to be helpful, and drafted. And okay, and again, I figured it out. I think that when you're lawyering, there are a lot of things you have to teach yourself. But I think it would have been a little bit more helpful if somebody kind of went over things in a little more detail, which I try to do now with younger lawyers.
Now, you were not married at the time?
No.
So
and by the way the world was then, that was the last thing on my mind. I kind of figured, being very, you know, by this age I'm going to do this, by that age I'm going to do that. I figured I'll become a partner at the age of 30. I'll meet someone at 31 or 32, and I'll be married. I'll have my 2 children by the time I'm 35, 36, and everything will be terrific.
And how'd
of course,
that go?
Didn't work out that way. Things I could control, I actually controlled magnificently, right? I mean, you know, great, you know, colleges, the top law school at Chicago, you know, NYU, you name it. Got the job of my dreams, got to work on the big high-profile deals, developed mentor relationships, you know, all the things that you're supposed to be doing. I did them all. I got the brass ring. The day it happened, I felt as though I was floating on the ceiling. Oh, this is great. Now that I got that under my belt, I have to meet Mr. Right. But it didn't work that way. It took a lot longer.
Well, and this is not a forgiving business. I mean...
No, but it's not forgiving for not the reason I think. Tell me why you think it's not forgiving.
It sounds like a 24/7 job.
It is, and it was, and it still is. But that's not really the problem. I think the person, I mean, yes, that's maybe part of the problem, but I think the more significant problem is that in those days, the men were totally unwilling in the 70s and 80s mostly, to accept that a 30-year-old or a 31-year-old woman who was younger than them were a partner in a marquee law firm, and not just, you know, in any department, in the, you know, Navy SEALs of corporate lawyering,
right, M&A,
mergers and acquisitions. And I thought it would be great because I knew that if I were short, fat, and bald, the 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired women would be after me. I mean, I've seen that, right?
But yes,
but
that
it's
was
a
true.
reality.
Yes.
Okay, so I was 5'7" with blonde hair. And I, you know, size 4, size 6. I looked pretty damn good when I was 30, even when I was 40, if you see my wedding pictures. But the reality was, it was the complete reverse for women. Unless you were already married, men, look but don't touch.
They were threatened.
Absolutely. And it came out in the weirdest ways. I dated one guy who actually said to me, there was a story about our law firm in the National Law Journal about the amount of money that partners at my law firm earned. And it was picked up by the New York Times, and he read the story. And he said he spoke to one of his friends about it. And this was a fellow who was about 8 years older than I was. So, that's a big age difference, but not out of the question. And he said that I asked my friend what he thought about this, because I told him I was dating a woman who, was working at this law firm. And his friend said that he thought it was a terrible thing that a woman would earn more than the husband. Well, this was in the mid-1980s. I dated someone who said to me, come off it, you're a woman. This is right before I became a partner. You'll never make it as a partner at Skadden Arps because you're a woman. And I think this is just a manifestation of their inability to, it's the court of public opinion. It's the
for sure.
culture changing. Nowadays, the interesting thing is that until the very late 1990s, we didn't have one woman associate get married and have children as an associate. Now, all the women who get married and they have kids and they don't, and they still become partners. I have a lot of women partners whose husbands stay at home and take care of the family and help. And believe me, that's a harder job.
Heck yeah.
Because I kind of have done both with my family.
Heck yeah.
And I could tell you the family stuff is more important and is harder than going to work every day. But the world has changed. I recognize it. I applaud it. I think it's terrific. I wish it existed that way, when I was younger.
But you found someone who was not threatened by you.
No. Yes. What am I saying? Cut.
He loved you for who you were.
Right. But there was a secret, and I realized again what a mistake I was making, which was all along I should have been dating gentlemen who were at least 10 years older than I was. Significantly older, because at that point they're not threatened and they know what they want and they're receptive. My husband, who's about 12 years, a little bit less than 12 years older than I am, he would present me as his trophy wife when we first got married. And he delighted and was excited that I had this wonderful career, and has been very supportive of me because he made his own way and his own success in his career, so he wasn't threatened by me.
So now we have to talk, and especially for people who are just listening to this, you and your husband were on a ski trip.
Correct. And my son.
And your son.
10 years ago.
Okay. Do you mind talking about it?
Sure. It was a year in which I worked extraordinarily hard. It was 2007, probably the hardest year as a partner at Skadden Arps. I was absolutely exhausted, and we flew out on December 23rd, 2007 to Telluride, Colorado to go skiing. The first run of the day on Christmas Eve day, the 24th of December, the very first run of the day, my husband and I were going to do like an easy run, but we were on a triple chairlift, and somebody was, oh, go to the top with me, it's great. We went to the top, and I've done this before. We were skiing down the side of the mountain where it's kind of a big wide open area, and then you could ski off various ridges. My son was in ski school, my husband was a little ahead of me, and I was on a big wide area, but it was gently sloping. I caught an edge, which means I lost my balance on my skis, and I'd been skiing at that point for 39 years since I was a child, so a little kid. And I couldn't stand up, I couldn't maintain my balance. And unlike some ski areas where they have netting from the top to on the trails to keep people in, I wish they had it there. They just had a thin rope. And I went under the rope into a cluster of trees I was about 5 feet from a clearing, and I heard my neck snap. I hit a tree, and I had no feeling immediately, and I knew I was in deep trouble. And also I lost terrible lung capacity almost immediately. I had a collapsed lung, and I was screaming for help, and nobody, finally, after about 45 minutes, somebody heard me and came over and found me and got the ski patrol. And that's what happened. And I don't remember very much about that once they started taking me down the mountain, because they gave me painkillers and drugs and things, and, you know.
And you originally had no movement in your arms.
None whatsoever. Now I got lots of movement.
Look at that. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, got it mostly back. My fingers, I'm now working on the fingers, some experimental treatments. But I got my arms back, which is really major. Really
Huge,
major.
because then you got back to work.
Got back to work.
Crazy thing, you.
Yes, I did. Because what was I going to do? Sit home and stare out the window all day long?
Right, and feel sorry for yourself. I get that. Like, no one who's made up, who has a brain like you, could sit home. From the ripe age of 12, clearly you couldn't sit home. So you go back. Skadden welcomes you with open arms, does everything they can to accommodate
They
you.
actually they did too many things. They said, oh, we're supposed to get you, they hired a consultant. We're going to get you a special desk, and we're going to take all the things out of your office, and we're going to make it big, wide open and spacious so you could maneuver in your wheelchair, and we've hired all these consultants and whatever. I got back to my office and said, no.
Aww.
I want everything to be just the way it was. And in fact, I said, save your money. We don't need to do that. We need to lift my desk up. So let's send it out to a furniture repair place and have them build another 6 inches to the bottom and stain the wood dark brown like my desk, call it a day. And that's what we did. We removed the chair that I had behind my desk, and instead I roll in. And that was about the only change we made, other than to get me voice activated, the Dragon system, which is really great.
Right, so you don't have to type.
Right, although I do have these things I put on my fingers that look like door stops that I tape onto my fingers. They're really jerry-rigged, so that when I need to type on the keyboard, mostly I can do it verbally through the Dragon system, but I can like peck like that, and so I do that as well.
But you still were able to work on amazing deals after this.
Yeah, I did some of the biggest deals of my career.
Like what? What were your favorites after that?
Oh, there were two.
Post-accident.
There were two favorites that I have to say. One of them was for a company called Digital Globe, which is a satellite company that provides a lot of the satellite pictures for the National Security Agency, the CIA, and friendly nations. So putting those satellites in the air is very expensive. Some of them blow up. It's a very tricky business. And there was another company in the same line of business as them, from our perspective, not as well run, but that company did tried to do a hostile takeover of my client, and instead everyone flew into New York, and we had all the bankers and the PR people and the lawyers. We ended up winning. We did, I think, if not the only, one of the only Pac-Man defenses, which is a term that goes back to the 1980s, where one company acquires, one company's going after, company A is going after B, but B ends up acquiring A.
Right.
And we did it, and it was a tremendous win-win-win. The stock price tripled. My client was extremely happy. Phenomenal turn.
This is amazing, and you're doing this from a wheelchair.
I'm doing it from a wheelchair. I negotiated the whole thing, and I had a great time doing it. And the other one that I thought was great, and this is, again, gets to be a little bit technical, but it was an M&A deal involving a utility called, my client was a company called Great Plains Energy, and they're based in Kansas City. And for over 15, going on almost 20 years, they were trying to acquire Missouri, they were trying to acquire a Kansas company, and the Kansas company came after them, and they went back and forth, and we called them the Kansas-Missouri utility wars. Eventually, my client wanted to acquire the electric assets of this Kansas company, and they did so, but they didn't want the gas assets. And the public company in Kansas was public, so it's a very tricky thing to split up.
So you broke it up.
Right, but what we did is we had a three-way merger agreement where my client, well, one client bought assets, my client bought the shell company, and it all happened simultaneously. Very tricky transaction, cross conditions, all sorts of technical things.
And
we did it. We figured it out.
Of course you did. Now let me ask you, what do you think about M&A today?
I think it's...
Because you're still involved.
Yeah, I'm still involved. I still have clients who call me up, but it's mostly now for judgment stuff. I've taken up counsel status, but I'm in the office 4 or 5 times a week. And I'll tell you what I think. While the law is always evolving as to what's a breach of a fiduciary duty when you're trying to sell your company, and have you triggered certain well-known Delaware law prohibitions on how you, or rules of the road that have existed, like the famous Revlon decision. All of those really major situations and cases occurred in the 80s, and some of them I worked on deals where those issues got resolved. Now I view it as it's still evolving, but it's gotten much more like a little nuance in this direction or that direction. When we were doing it, there were no rules. It was the Wild West. You wanted to do an exclusionary tender offer and make your tender offer open to everyone except the bad guy who is creeping up on you. You could do it until the court said you can't do it.
But why is it different today? Is it because technology is evolving and we don't even understand the basis of these companies?
No, it's not that. It's that the major critical rules, the basis, it's like the Magna Carta or the Constitution or the Bill of Rights in the United States. The basic parameters were determined in the 80s, and everything now is derivative of that. And so, yes, you have changes, and they're little, if you set up a special committee in certain cases, you can get, again, this is really inside poker. You can get business judgment rule treatment for the board as opposed to entire fairness, which is a higher standard of scrutiny put on the board.
Harder, you're saying,
yeah,
basically.
but these are nuances. The basic rules of, if you're going to sell your company and it's public, you have to get the best price reasonably available under the circumstances. That's still the, like the First Amendment to the Constitution.
Right, that still holds.
That's the First Amendment for M&A lawyering that was, determined in the 1980s.
Before I let you go, you were writing a book.
I'm writing 2 books,
You're writing 2 books. Okay, can you tell us quickly about them?
Sure, very quickly. One book, which I hope that the draft is just about finished, is, the working title is kind of The Lessons Learned and the Rules of the Road. And what it is, I would say it's for any young professional wanting to go into law or banking or accounting or a corporate setting. What are the norms? What's expected of you? It's geared toward lawyers, but I think anyone wanting to go to business school or law school and wants to do it in a corporate environment would be well advised to read this. It's not long-winded. I try to make it punchy and funny, and I give a lot of examples of things I personally lived through so that they understand
and
that
I think in and of itself is reason to read the book.
Oh, well, thank you.
Because
but it's a kind of, I have lots of stories, and many of them are in there, and I could probably write 3 of these books. But this is the first
we could
one.
Probably sit all day and listen to you.
The second one is a memoir, and it's about what made me to want to do all of this, what I did, what it was like being one of the first women to, make it at a Wall Street law firm as a partner. Look, when I went to Skadden, there were no women partners, and now we have, of course, many. So, how do you develop mentors? How did things work out for me? How did I get to where I got to? And then, of course, what happened to me after the accident? And also, what did I learn about being a woman, and what advice I can give to women in particular, which, by the way, I've intentionally not read Leaning In or any of those other books, because I have my own views and I have no idea whether it jibes with them, but I don't want to be influenced.
I think that is the perfect place to end this. Nancy, you are inspirational. You are
Let's get out the violence.
No, no, God, no. You make me feel lazy.
Aww.
Honestly, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.